The sound of blueprints sliding off my desk was the last thing I recall before hitting the floor in my office at the city engineering department in Columbus, Ohio. It wasn't the increasing dizziness, chest tightness I dismissed as stress, or my vision narrowing like someone dimming the lights in an escape-proof room. Instead, it was the sharp crack of rolled-up elevation plans hitting the concrete floor that echoed in my ears. After that, silence. I am Raymond Calloway, 47 years old, a licensed civil engineer with 22 years of experience. The kind of man who arrives at work by 6:30 and leaves when the job is complete, not when the clock dictates. Over the past 2 decades, I have designed drainage systems for 3 counties, oversaw the reconstruction of 2 highway interchanges, and held my team together through budget cuts that would have shattered men with greater resources and less tenacity. At 2:15 on a Tuesday afternoon, I'm not typically found collapsed in my office. Yet, that's exactly where I was. Regaining consciousness 4 hours later at Ohio Health Grant Medical Center, with an IV attached to me and electrodes stuck to my chest. The first thought that crossed my mind wasn't about the chest pain or the doctor explaining that I had a near heart attack, not a full one, but close enough to alarm everyone who witnessed it. My immediate concern was that no one had returned my call. I inquired from the nurse if she had managed to contact my wife, and she replied affirmatively. They dialed the emergency contact number in my phone, a number I'd had for 18 years, Diane's number. The nurse looked at me sympathetically, choosing her words carefully before delivering potentially disappointing news. She acknowledged that they were aware of the situation. In that downtown Columbus hospital bed, I was tethered to devices monitoring each heartbeat, words tumbling in my mind like a puzzling stone you repeatedly pick up and put down. She was cognizant of the circumstance, not "I'm on my way," or "I'm parking the car now," or even "I can't make it but tell him I love him." Simply she understood. Closing my eyes, I consoled myself there must be an explanation. Perhaps Diane's mother, Patris, was experiencing health issues. Maybe there was a crisis or emergency she was managing. Maybe something rationalized the inexplicable. Little did I know then how incorrect I would be about most things. If this story strikes a chord, resonating with your own experience of reaching out during a crisis, only to find nothing on the other end, subscribe to this channel immediately. 1. Subscribe to our notifications as we share weekly stories about real individuals, families, and moments that unveil their true selves. Comment below and share if you've ever been alone in a hospital bed, awaiting someone who didn't show up. Let's discuss it. To grasp what occurred the day I collapsed, one must comprehend the 2 years preceding it, as the cardiac event wasn't spontaneous. The stress that had been mounting within me resembled the pressure that builds in a compromised pipe, gradually, imperceptibly, and then all at once. In 1999, I met Diane at a 4th of July party in Westerville, a suburb approximately 15 miles north of Columbus. She was 24 and I was 25. At first sight, she was laughing at something her friend said, and I thought she was the most vibrant person I'd ever encountered in a room. We dated for 2 years. In the summer of 2001, we tied the knot at a humble ceremony in Worthington, Ohio, held in her father Gerald's backyard, complete with a catered dinner that he gladly covered and often reminisced about as his finest investment for the following decade. Gerald Whitfield, a multifaceted man, had established a compact chain of auto supply stores across central Ohio, sold them exceeding expectations, and retired at 62, financially secured enough to voice an opinion on everything and persistently share it. He adored Diane, his daughter, deeply in a manner that made other relationships seem insignificant. Polite during family gatherings, he inquired about my projects, remembered my name, offered a firm handshake, and performed all the expected duties of a decent father-in-law. However, beneath this politeness, I could sense an undercurrent, a subtle tension I struggled to define. His curiosity regarding my salary was slightly excessive. His casual references to other men Diane had dated prior to me, though seemingly unintentional, were never so. In the initial years of our marriage, he often commented about men like Raymond, a dependable man, as if reliability was a quality to be admired in a pet dog instead of a spouse. I justified it as a generational trait or his protective instincts. However, I was incorrect about that too. Our marriage was good for a considerable period. It is important to acknowledge this truth. In 2004, we purchased a house in Dublin, Ohio, a spacious 4-bedroom colonial on a tranquil street featuring a sizable backyard that Diane transformed into a charming sanctuary. She possessed a knack for such transformations, making ordinary spaces feel like desirable destinations. She worked part-time as an office manager for a pediatric practice and spent her evenings communicating with her sister, Lena, who lived approximately 20 minutes away in Gahanna. Lena, 6 years younger, was sharper with an air of self-assuredness that at times felt like sharp edges. She possessed a unique charm of being the most captivating person in every room and seemed to relish in her knowledge of it. In the initial stages, I didn't dislike Lena. I found her amusing, albeit in modest measures. Her storytelling ability was engaging, keeping one hooked. However, over time, I began to discern a pattern in her interactions with Diane. A conversation with Lena often left Diane feeling somewhat dissatisfied with her own life, more conscious of what she lacked, and more inclined later to make pointed comments about our spending habits, my work schedule, or our financial decisions. Gerald, it seemed, was the one who frequently thought we should have invested in that property on the north side, a notion that became increasingly prominent in our marriage as the years passed. Gerald believes I should have accepted the county transportation authority role instead of remaining at the city. Gerald thinks we overspent on our kitchen remodel and underspent on what he considered necessary expenses. As a civil engineer, I understand how structures deteriorate. It's rarely an abrupt collapse, but a gradual accumulation of small concessions, imperceptible cracks that become significant when the weight becomes excessive, causing the entire structure to fail suddenly. This is what transpired with my marriage. I failed to anticipate the impending issues because I was engrossed in work and neglected to observe the developments within my own household. The problems began approximately 2 years prior to my breakdown. Diane returned home from a family dinner at Gerald's Upper Arlington residence on a Sunday evening, where she usually dined with Lena and Gerald. Due to project deadlines, I frequently missed these gatherings. She settled at the kitchen table and shared her belief that we needed to reconsider our goals. I sought clarification, curious about her perspective. She expressed concern that I seemed distant, physically present yet mentally absent. She implied that Lena suspected the strain between us wasn't merely related to my work hours, but stemmed from a fundamental incongruity in our life aspirations. I paused, digesting her words. Then I questioned her about what Lena desired for her own life, and whether Lena's viewpoint on our marriage would maintain its influence. This, however, was an ill-timed comment. I recognized the error instantly as soon as my words left me. Yet I struggled to express a more suitable response, because acknowledging the impact of her words demanded admitting my emotional vulnerability, something I had spent 22 years as a man avoiding by internalizing pressures and pressing onward. For approximately 4 months, my partner and I attended counseling with Dr. Patricia Howell, a composed woman based off Morse Road in Columbus. Over 16 sessions, she guided us through endless discussions and eventually proposed the idea of individual therapy as a potential step towards our joint progress. My partner began individual therapy while I found myself too occupied to continue. In hindsight, my choice not to utilize that opportunity for help still lingers as one of the decisions I'm grappling with. Over the ensuing 18 months, subtle changes occurred within our household, nothing drastic or pinpointable. It was more akin to the slow repositioning of a compass needle when a magnet is nearby. My partner increasingly spent weekends at her father's house. Our Sunday dinners transformed into Saturday afternoons that extended to full days and eventually overnight stays. Upon arriving home on a Friday, I found a note on the counter indicating she was at Gerald's and would return by Sunday. Engrossed in work, I immersed myself as I supervised a significant infrastructure project, the replacement of a bridge on Columbus West Side that had been in development for 3 years. My role as lead engineer demanded grueling hours and persistent pressure, yet amidst this tumultuous routine, I gradually surrendered my attempts to preserve my marriage, not due to apathy but rather ignorance of how, and because each attempt to bridge the widening gap between us seemed to hit an unseen and firm obstacle. The discomfort in my chest first manifested in the spring. I rationalized it as stress, attributed it to poor posture, reasoning that I'd spent weeks hunched over blueprints. 2:15 in the afternoon on a Tuesday in October, blueprints slipped from my desk and the lights went dark. For 4 days, I was hospitalized due to a hypertensive crisis that led to a substantial cardiac incident, as Dr. James Adler, my cardiologist, explained. This wasn't a traditional heart attack, but it was precariously close, prompting them to monitor me closely, perform tests, alter medications, and engage in frank discussions regarding my blood pressure, stress levels, and self-management strategies. Regrettably, I found that my coping methods were insufficient. The nurses were compassionate. My coworkers sent flowers along with a card everyone in the department had signed, even the city engineer himself, which held significance for me. 14-year coworker Dale Witten, referred to as Dale, visited me on the second afternoon for an hour, chatting about baseball without mentioning work. Diane didn't show up. She called during the initial day, and our discussion lasted 6 minutes. She expressed her apologies about the situation, wished me rest, and mentioned that Gerald was dealing with issues, making it a challenging week for the family. She promised to visit when things became less hectic. After we ended our call, I kept the phone aside and gazed at the hospital room's ceiling for an extended period. On the second morning, my caring nurse, Brenda, entered to monitor my vitals and inquired about any needs. I replied that I was all right. She gazed at me with a look that comes from years of witnessing people in their most challenging circumstances, and simply stated, "It's normal if you're not okay. Most aren't when they're here." This straightforward truth, seldom spoken to me before, almost caused me to break down on the spot. I didn't weep, but I desired to. On the second day, I discovered the reason for my distress. A nurse had given me back my phone that morning, and I'd avoided looking at it because I didn't want to. However, I needed to check a detail about the bridge project, information only I possessed, which could cause complications if overlooked. So I took up my phone, unlocked it, and saw 44 missed calls waiting for me. 44. The bulk of them were from the first night, when I'd been unconscious, then sedated and unreachable. Calls came from Dale, 2 engineers, an unrecognized number which was later identified as the hospital's patient services for Diane, my brother Kevin in Cleveland, with whom I hadn't spoken in 3 weeks, and Diane herself twice, along with a call from Gerald's landline in Upper Arlington. A text message from Diane arrived at 917 the previous night. Raymond, Dad's attorney, suggests we discuss urgent matters without delay. It's crucial. Call when you feel ready. I reread this text 3 times. I was in a hospital bed and had been there for nearly 30 hours, connected to a cardiac monitor. I was unconscious when brought here, and Diane's message concerned her father's lawyer and an issue that couldn't wait. Dad's legal matter requires immediate attention. Please respond when convenient. I left my uneaten meal and gazed at the wall for an extended period before making a call I hadn't initiated in years. I contacted Kevin. He responded promptly on the second ring, asking, "Ray, I've been on edge." "What's going on?" And so I told him everything, not only about the heart incident, but also Diane, our strained Sundays, unproductive counseling sessions, the note on the counter, the brief phone conversation, the 44 missed calls, and the text regarding the lawyer. Kevin remained largely silent as I spoke, only listening attentively. Upon my conclusion, he inquired, "Do you need me there?" I denied, stating that I was okay, but something unforeseen slipped from my lips. I asked for his presence. "I believe something's severely amiss, Kev. It's not just my heart," he admitted. "I've known for some time. I simply didn't know how to express it to you without exacerbating the situation." That discussion was my first honest one in years I can't recall. On the same day, my sister-in-law uploaded a picture on social media. Derek, a colleague who had been tracking the family on social media for years due to his friendship with Diane's brother from a neighborhood league, forwarded me the snapshot along with a message that read, "Hey there, mate. Not sure if you've come across this. You likely haven't. Take care of yourself." The image showed Diane, Lena, Gerald, Patris, and 3 cousins at a park in Upper Arlington. They were gathered around a picnic table in the afternoon sunlight. There was food on the table. Someone was heard laughing. Gerald had his usual photogenic smile. That contented, tranquil expression he bore when events unfolded as Gerald Whitfield thought they should. The caption Lena penned read, "Drama-free family day. Sometimes all you need is your people close by." A drama-free family day was depicted in the picture. I scrutinized that image for a prolonged period. I focused on Diane within it. She smiled, not a broad, wide smile. The cautious grin a person assumes when mindful of the camera was worn by her. However, she was present, basking under the sun, seated at a picnic table with her kin, while I was 47 years old and stretched out in a downtown Columbus hospital bed. Electrodes attached to my chest, isolated, devoid of drama. I wish I could share that I retaliated negatively, that I summoned Diane using my phone and expressed all the emotions churning within my breast. A portion of me yearned for such an outburst. Another part of me was simmering with rage in the deep, silent manner that men who have long suppressed their feelings eventually become enraged. Not boisterous, not bombastic, merely complete and frigid. Yet I did not call her. Lowered the phone, reclined, gazed at the ceiling, reflecting on a phrase from Arthur Calloway, a man who served as Columbus building inspector for 31 years and whose composed wisdom I had always aspired to emulate. He would say, "Raymond, don't let anyone force you into a response. A response is what they want. A reaction is what you give." In that hospital bed, I pledged not to react impulsively. Instead, I'd respond deliberately. Not just yet, though, not while my strength waned, not while the contours of this predicament remained unclear. So I vowed to be vigilant, focusing keenly on every detail. After 4 days, they released me with a pile of documents, new medications, an appointment with a cardiologist, and a sobering discussion from Doctor, no preamble or explanations necessary. Regarding Adler's perspective on psychological stress impacting cardiovascular health, he was straightforward. He deemed my heart physically manageable, but emphasized the concerning circumstances around it. He expressed that individuals in similar situations, specifically middle-aged men dealing with chronic stress who often remain silent about their struggles, have a tendency to revisit him under deteriorating conditions if they fail to bring about change. I acknowledged his concerns. His expression towards me mirrored that of doctors when patients profess understanding, but medical records imply otherwise. The previous day, Kevin had traveled from Cleveland and was waiting in the room as I exited. He'd taken off work without informing me of his arrival. Seeing him in his coat, hands tucked into his pockets, appearing older than usual yet robust like lifelong brothers are, filled me with more gratitude than I knew how to express. He drove me home afterwards. Kevin brought my bag indoors and quietly explored the house meticulously crafted by Diane. Silence filled the room as there was little to speak about. The dwelling stood immaculate, perfectly organized, and devoid of its owner. Diane was absent. A message lay on the kitchen counter. It informed me she had departed to her father's residence and would return in a short while, expressing her hopes for my recovery. Kevin glanced at the note over my shoulder and placed it back gently before querying, "Would you like some coffee?" I consented, and we spent 4 hours conversing intimately. A conversation long overdue about Diane, Gerald, Lena, and my neglect in addressing issues that required confrontation. He shared his observations on the influences shaping Diane's perception of our marriage, which I had failed to acknowledge sufficiently due to adhering to my personal narrative. Kevin provided insights into the matter as well. Over the years, Kevin and I frequently interacted with Diane's family during holidays and events, and I always appreciated Diane sincerely. However, Gerald often made me uncomfortable in a way I couldn't quite express to you because I didn't want to share something that might not be welcome. "That man," Kevin stated, "has never considered you good enough for her, not due to your personality, but what you symbolize. You're someone he didn't select, and Gerald Whitfield dislikes things he doesn't choose." Pondering this, I recalled 18 years of uninvited Sunday dinners, Diane returning home from her father's house altered each time, and Gerald thinks becoming a recurring theme in our discussions about my career, earnings, decisions, and worth as a spouse. Additionally, I remembered the cryptic text, "Dad's lawyer, something urgent." I inquired Kevin for his interpretation of this message. Glance fixed on me, he advised, "It might be wise to contact your personal attorney prior to reaching out to Diane again." Next morning, I phoned Sandra Ockhaffer, a lawyer I'd employed previously for real estate issues. Recalling her as meticulous and straightforward, I required such an individual. After explaining the situation, she queried pertinent questions before instructing me to visit. 2 days post-hospital discharge, I complied. Over the ensuing hour, she presented perspectives I hadn't fully contemplated. The legal implications of a spouse consulting family lawyers without prior notification, the complications surrounding hard-to-access financial records, and the familiar pattern discernible in my descriptions. After leaving the meeting, I parked at home for 20 minutes before going inside. I called Diane then, and she picked up on the third ring. Her voice, as cautious as it had been for months, was polite and deliberate, hinting at an unspoken decision. I informed her that I was back home, shared Dr. Adler's advice to minimize stress and consult a specialist, and mentioned Kevin had left for Cleveland. She expressed relief that I arrived safely. I asked about her return date, to which she responded after a pause, saying she and her father were contemplating the idea of providing us some distance during my recovery, to reduce extra pressure and allow me to rest more easily. When I inquired about who suggested this, she hesitated before responding that it was a family decision. She implied Gerald deemed his strategy as most beneficial under the current circumstances. I inquired, "Could you clarify the situation? What exactly is transpiring from your point of view?" She paused, and in that moment I discerned a hesitation I hadn't anticipated for quite some time. I sensed she was uncertain. I realized she had allowed others to dictate her thoughts for so long that she wasn't entirely confident about her own convictions. Beneath her calculated politeness, I detected the voice of a woman who was in transit between where she had been and where she was being guided, unsure about finding her own footing. I am not using this to justify her actions or inactions. I am saying it because I believe it's accurate, and because acknowledging its truth was more challenging than straightforward deception would have been. I posed, "I need you to respond honestly when I ask this. What are your true feelings, independent of what your father thinks or what Lena thinks?" She replied, "All right." I asked, "Do you still have affection for me?" There was an uncharacteristic pause, but one that held an uncomfortable shape. She responded, "I believe I need some moments to discern my emotions." I appreciated her candor. I urged her to take as much time as she needed and added that when she had clarified her feelings, I hoped to be informed. We ended the call. I remained seated at the kitchen table in the home she had made cozy, and for the first time in a while, I allowed myself to fully feel all of it unsuppressed, unforced, beyond the distractions of work and progress, and the gratification derived from managing what I could control. Instead, I felt the immense weight of everything. It was the heaviest burden I'd ever borne. Then, gradually, I started to ponder what the subsequent steps would be. The ensuing weeks were not an immediate metamorphosis. Change does not occur this way. I wish to emphasize this point, as tales concluding with a sudden victory after a dramatic revelation can misrepresent the true nature of rebuilding. The subsequent events were slow, challenging, and at times eerily silent. I scheduled an appointment with my cardiologist. Each morning, I embarked on a 3-mile walk along the trail near the Scioto River, a path I had previously neglected. This route led me past boat rentals, dog walkers, and energetic students from Ohio State, jogging past me with their earbuds in, their future stretching out ahead of them. My diet underwent changes. I slept more and addressed any unusual feelings by contacting my doctor instead of ignoring them. Twice a week, I spoke to Kevin, conversations that proved more valuable than I could quantify. Following Sandra's advice, I organized my financial records for clarity, not out of hostility, but due to the necessity of understanding my current situation. Upon thorough examination, I discovered nothing sensational. No hidden finances or secret expenditures were discovered, yet there were signs hinting at Diane's contemplation of our marriage's end for a longer duration than she confessed. Transactions into accounts solely under her name, subscriptions and adjustments surreptitiously moved, a subtle shift towards her financial autonomy from me that had been in progress over the previous year. Gerald Whitfield, being a businessman, recognized assets and liabilities. Somehow I had been perceived as a liability by him. Diane visited our house 3 weeks after my discharge. At our kitchen table, where Kevin and I had once discussed, and I'd repeatedly contemplated her text message, we had the most truthful conversation in years. She wept while I remained dry-eyed, not because I was emotionless, but because I wasn't feeling anything publicly. For 3 weeks, I allowed myself to truly feel my emotions, which also meant learning to stay with them without acting on them. She confessed that she had gotten lost, letting her father and sister fill in the blanks in our marriage with their own version of events, making it the reality she lived in. She acknowledged the dishonesty in the social media picture and the text about the lawyer. She admitted that her father was pushing her towards a path she hadn't fully chosen for herself, and out of fear of disappointing him, she conceded. I listened to everything she said. Then, I told her the truth. I believed her, but I couldn't go back to how things were before. Not because I no longer loved her, I did after 18 years and a shared life, but because I needed her to grasp something clearly. I said, "Diane, I had a breakdown at work." For 4 days, I found myself in a hospital alone. The 10 minutes you pondered over visiting, those can't be undone without concerted effort from us both. Not the type of work your father or Lena might envision. Ours instead. She acknowledged this without protest. We resumed couples therapy, but with a new therapist, Dr. Theodore Marsh, situated downtown on Broad Street, suggested by Sandra's colleague. Simultaneously, I maintained my individual sessions, attending weekly, sharing thoughts openly for the first time. This was arguably one of the toughest tasks in my 22 years, harder even than bridging projects or critical infrastructure crises, yet indispensable. 3 months later, Gerald phoned me. His call came as a shock. Our last direct conversation was before the hospital. On a weekday morning, he inquired if I was available to chat. I agreed that I was. He spoke at length about work-related matters, as he usually did, steering the conversation through familiar grounds of practicalities. Eventually, he reached the reason for his call. He mentioned that Diane appeared to be improving recently and seemed more settled. I replied that I was glad. He inquired if I harbored any grudges against the family. After a brief pause, I considered the word family, the photo at the picnic table, the unanswered 44 calls, and a message about a lawyer, a man who had assessed my value based on his personal standards for 19 years and found it lacking. I responded, "Gerald, I hold no grudges against anyone, but I also won't pretend that what transpired was inconsequential. Diane was my emergency contact. I was hospitalized. I believe we can both agree that the situation wasn't managed as it should have been." There was a moment of silence before he replied, "I understand." He simply said, "I know." In him, I noticed a quietness filled with an unfamiliar tone. It wasn't an apology outright, but it was more than silence. I replied, "I acknowledge that." We conversed for a while longer before parting ways. It wasn't the comprehensive resolution my inner self believed the circumstance required. However, I had ceased evaluating my life based on what I thought I deserved and started assessing it according to reality. Reality, as it turned out, was preferable. Reality was something I could actively engage with. I share this narrative from a space that is still in transition. It's crucial for me to be open about its ongoing nature. My marriage isn't mended yet, and I'm uncertain if it will ever be. Diane and I are taking steps forward in the healing process. Some weeks, those actions seem to foster growth. Other times, they feel like attempting to rebuild after a flood, questioning whether the ground beneath is secure. Dr. Marsh assures us both that this is typical. The mere act of us continuing our conversation in his office signifies a level of commitment, even if it doesn't seem sufficient. My health has improved. The cardiologist is pleased with my statistics. I walk every morning now. I've been learning, albeit slowly and imperfectly, to express when things are amiss rather than bottling up until it escalates into a hospital crisis. Kevin visited for Thanksgiving. We shared a meal at the same kitchen table that I prepared myself. This is something I began during the silent months, searching for an activity for my hands beyond work. And we conversed, as we do now, honestly and without pretense. He inquired about what I would have altered. After much contemplation, I admitted that I would have spoken up sooner. Not with a shout or a spectacle, but I would have sat down at the kitchen table before it escalated into a crisis and voiced my concerns. Instead of feigning ignorance, I require your assistance to comprehend this matter. It's not due to fear, but because I choose not to overlook it. If given the chance earlier, I would have contacted Kevin more promptly. I would have endured more than 2 sessions with Dr. Howell. I wouldn't have let Gerald Whitfield dictate my actions within my marriage based on his perception of my value. And at some point, I would have clarified to Diane that love isn't passive. A marriage isn't something you automatically possess due to the robustness of your wedding vows. It requires daily active participation, not just in times of ease, but especially during hardships. Because on that hospital day, when I lay there abandoned with 44 unanswered calls on my phone, I grasped a truth that I think I had subconsciously known for a while. The people who love you genuinely, and in the manner that love functions, don't ponder whether to arrive. They simply do. People simply arrive, abandoning their tasks because you are important. The ones who need to weigh the pros and cons reveal their true feelings through that calculation. I am Raymond Calloway, aged 47, a civil engineer. On a Tuesday afternoon in October, I collapsed at work, marking the start of the most genuine phase of my life. I'm still constructing, but now I'm more cautious about what foundations I lay. What struck me hardest about Raymond's narrative wasn't the hospital or the photo. It was the 44 unanswered calls. This number, 44, speaks volumes about how long someone questioned your significance. Most of us have our own variation of that number, a call left unreturned, a moment when we discovered who truly stood by us. Raymond didn't erupt or plead. He simply grew quiet and began to pay attention. And honestly, that is the best strategy. Leave a comment below. Have you ever experienced a situation where you had 44 unanswered calls on your phone? I've gone through the same. If this resonates with you, consider subscribing. We tackle such topics weekly.